recording now, so be sure to come and check out that website if you'd like to see this recording in about a week or so. And I'm going to introduce our three speakers, and then we're going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and I'm going to leave about 15 minutes for questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question, please type it into the chat. I'll give you guys a bit of a reminder as we wind down, but that's where we'll be taking the questions. So we are live and with all the kind of technical hiccups that requires. So I'm going to introduce our designer, Jussara, but she's not joined us quite yet. So we might just have a panel of two this afternoon. But a native Brazilian of Korean heritage, Jussara moved to New York City in 1987 to study at the Fashion Institute of Technology. She launched her namesake label upon graduation, landing in prominent retail stores. Hi! Worldwide, such as Bergdorf Goodman, Isetan, and Fred Segal. For the past 20 years, the company has deliberately scaled back to focus on making the best-fitting, custom-made clothes with the gentlest impact on the environment. Hand tailoring, hand embroidery, local production, biodegradable materials, natural dyes, and the addition of mending services and a collection of transformed vintage clothes are all part of Jussara's efforts to create a circular business model where the least amount of natural resources are plundered from nature and waste is given a new purpose. Throughout the year, Jussara hosts a number of community engagement events around the themes of turning old clothes into new ones using zero waste techniques. These gatherings allow clients to develop a closer connection to their clothing, as well as to promote creativity to update their existing clothes. Johanna Orlowski was born in Germany and raised in Ukraine. She moved to Berlin in her 20s, where she became highly skilled at tailoring and decided to study fashion design in order to develop her craft. After earning a BA in fashion design, Johanna moved to New York City and immediately started working with Rubin and Chappelle for the following 3 years. Currently, she's both finishing her MA in Berlin with Hussein Chalayan as her supervising professor and her MFA at FIT in New York, where she resides with her husband. Johanna recently completed an internship at the RealReal, where she was on the design team to create new pieces of left-behind garments. Her own design work is very much in line with this process, as her collection is primarily made of discarded clothing and dead stock materials. Oftentimes, the topic evolves around the notion of being an immigrant and her childhood in Ukraine. Presently, her focus is on building her craftsmanship with embroidery, beading, and textile manipulation. Delfina Farías is a BFA fashion design student at FIT, specializing in knitwear. The focus of her work is based around transdisciplinary collaboration and sustainable design. In April of 2021, she took part in the 6876 kilometer online exhibition as designer for the Zero Waste collection. During the fall 2021 semester, she was one of the participants in the WM Design Challenge, where she explored a modular design as a tool for working with textile waste. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to start with a question for all of you. So please feel free in kind of whatever order you decide, or if the order I read your bios is easiest. What, in your opinion, makes a garment high quality and worthy of not only keeping for multiple seasons, but passing on to others? And I'm also going to add on, is this the same as a museum quality garment? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And Jussara, if you'd like to start, please.
Sure. Hi, how are you, Elizabeth, and our co-panelists? Nice to meet you all, and the people listening to us. I'm in California, so it's kind of warm in here. You feel like my sweat dripping face at some point. But to your question, so because of the environmental consequences of having clothes just kind of being churned out of production and sometimes not even barely being worn and thrown into the landfills, the quality and the fit is very important. I think is extremely important. So people have a relationship with the clothes, and if they feel something is well made, I think that's one big attributes to something that will make the people who wear them want to cherish them. So I mean, not only that, but also the fact that it has a good fit. I think fit is actually quite important. It's not as publicized as it should be, because I think it has so much to do with that relationship that I was talking about, that the wearer has with their garment when they put something on, and they just feel that, like if it's a jacket, that's what we specialized in. The armholes are kind of high, but you still can move. You feel have a better posture. The finishes, there's a lot of hand stitching, and hand stitching is not just because it's done by hand and it takes time, but it also has its huge value component, because when you do things at that pace that hand stitching allows you, you can do things that a machine cannot. So especially, again, back into the jacket, which is sort of what we are really proud of, you sew the armholes by hand, and every stitch that you pull in, you can ease in the fabric around it, and that gives you that movement and allows you to have a high underarm. I mean, this is a little technical, but basically all these small components that are sometimes not very visible, sometimes they're not visible at all, and is only really felt by the person wearing it, is what is going to determine sort of create a relationship that's going to determine them not to want to throw away. And if they have to part ways because of weight or whatever, they'll try to find somebody, they'll go that length to find somebody that they like to have that experience, as opposed to perhaps just donating to a Salvation Army, just put on that big bin of clothes. And then back to the museum quality, what makes that to be called a piece of garment a museum quality, it can vary. I mean, the hand stitching, hand embroidery is a big component, because that is what people used to be able to do when the time wasn't commoditized, and they could take time to just make a lace out of yarn by hand, huge yardage, to make big dresses. So that's definitely a museum quality, classifies as museum quality. But with time, there are some other things that will make things be categorized as a museum quality, and it could be a period of time, or a certain trend. Let's say, as an example, Steven Sprouse with his graffiti, that is very specific of a time, of a certain movement, so that could be considered a museum quality piece. um, and I think those things are sort of like like an era of a certain type that will make it a very characteristic of a time. So yeah, I'll let my other co-panels share on my thoughts.
Johanna, what do you think makes a garment high quality and perhaps museum quality?
Yeah, I obviously can just mainly talk for myself as the customer, because I either work for another company, or I kind of created small pieces of art that are not really worn yet. But I would say for me, the most important is the fiber itself. How is it a natural fiber? That's obviously always something that raises the quality of a garment. And I think for me personally, if I really cherish my pieces of clothing, and if there is if the quality is high, I would even wear it with a tear or mend it. And the moment a piece of garment is mended, it kind of even raises its quality, right? It gets something to be something very personal. And I really love that. And I think that would be something I would wish for the future of clothing to happen for a broader spectrum of people, that they start to love their clothes more the more they wear it. And as of the question about the museum quality garments, I think that's kind of a fluid topic, right? As the time progresses, more items kind of start to become museum quality items. I can't really say much to that, other than that I think every era at some point is going to be found in the museum. So yeah.
And Delfina, can you share your thoughts with us as well?
So I think there is a more human component too, that it's often overlooked, of even when it's a t-shirt that might have been worn and torn apart, and it's from a high school graduation, and you still have it and wear it, and pass it down. I think there is an emotional component that it cannot necessarily be created so strategically in a way. It's not sometimes even up to the designer to just give the emotional value that the wearer just attaches to a garment. But I think we can help for sure. Just try to ease that experience in a way which I think, as like Jussara said, that like just creating a garment that has a great fit, that helps create the value of the garment, and that it's what I think it's passed down. And when the value of the garment just downgrades, then the garment is thrown away very easily when we don't see the value in it. And when it comes to museum, I think museum quality garments are often not accessible for everyone. So it kind of tends to be a different topic in that way. I think it has to do also with the accessibility, and not necessarily it's not necessarily easy to compare a regular garment with a museum quality garment, just because they're not even worn in the same context necessarily. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
It's so interesting that all of you kind of pointed to this personal relationship. I think from the opposite side, all of us have had like clothes that don't make us feel great, and like us like finally getting rid of them and feeling cathartic about that. And so I think the opposite, kind of creating that feeling for customers, is so important, and maybe not something people always think about when it comes to sustainability. So I want to ask each of you, because each of you creates original designs from upcycled garments. Could you discuss why you chose this method and the benefits and drawbacks of this method to your design process? And Jussara, we can start back with you.
There you are. Okay, so I've chosen to reuse fabric scraps and kind of take that zero waste route because of basically the environment. I realize sort of 10 years into my career that it was so much waste, and we were squandering resources that were not getting replenished, and we were throwing a huge amount of clothes into the dumpsters, and out of sight, out of mind. Like back to what you were saying, that sometimes things don't fit for the most part. They you actually feel relief when you get rid of stuff. So it's like a sort of like a positive feeling, which we once you realize the repercussions of from the beginning of it, which is the extraction of natural resources, whether it's organic cotton or not, it's still extraction, and then going through the whole pollution process of polluting process of producing anything, starting from fabrics, textile, with the dyes, and then you have all this shipping, and at the end everything ends up in a landfill or in some third world country, and people actually have not even worn that piece. So the whole thing was like, oh my god, this is a total disaster. What am I doing? Am I just want to be part of this, knowing that's sort of like being simplistic, that's sort of like the process of plundering that we as fashion designers are all engaged. So I had to either change careers or think of about a solution, and zero waste was sort of like my path to redemption. And so I started to accumulate every single piece of scrap. I mean, first of all, I reduced the scale. I stopped doing wholesale because I thought no matter how little I try to be a part of this destructive system, the scale of it by making more than is necessary is on itself unsustainable. So I reduced my production. That was the first thing I did. I stopped doing wholesale. I went into producing it to the names that you cited as very reputable stores, and in Japan and in Hong Kong. And I just said, no more. We're going to just do custom made clothes. People have to come here in person. I have to take their measurements, and I hire. I mean, at that time when my first 10 years, the production was still in the city after everything got outsourced, but at least I was not doing that. But I started working with master tailors and people that are producing clothes in a more handmade, low impact manner. So people that do embroidery. Of course, I'm not perfect, and then there are a lot of things that I do that are just wrong. but scale was one of the things. Local production is another thing. Material resources, like everything. I really did a big, extensive research to find fabrics that were grown in the United States, so I could eliminate some of these carbon footprint from flying stuff back and forth from, places where fabrics usually are made. And then I just started to get so enthusiastic about the process, because it made me feel like my creativity was actually being used to solve a problem through fashion. And that was really exhilarating. And I was like, all right, I think I'm in the right path. And then from that point, I just progressively became a bit more challenging. And then it got to the point that now I have, jars or whatever, sometimes plastic bags that are not very attractive, but they ended up in my lap, so I have to use them. And I just stuff them with the fabric. I color code them. I sort of separate them by material sometimes. Different kinds of sorting. There's a lot of sorting going on in my waste-free process of designing. And it proved to be quite creative. And I started to come up with things that were so beautiful. And I could never have been able to do that if I were still doing a scaled production, or if I still was using the same methods that I was using when I first started. And the utilization of hand is incredible, like the things that can come out of it. And so I got really enthusiastic about it, and now I'm a really happy zero waste designer. And I feel like my sort of like call is to just bump it up in terms of cultural value, so people don't look at it as like, oh, that came from that was going to be garbage and then you're recycling. I try to really change it so people cannot even see it, where the material came from. So there's a lot of intervention, which makes the clothes a little bit on the expensive side, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, it's like, not that I'm making myself rich. I just try to like make a living out of it, and it's quite thrilling not to have to be on the rat race where you want to be super famous, super rich. I mean, my biggest accomplishment is just make something beautiful out of scraps that nobody would ever even know it was a scrap. And so that's the story about the how I chose it. What was the other two questions? I'm so sorry.
So it was why you chose this method, and what are the benefits and drawbacks to your design process?
Right. So there you go. I answered all your questions.
Johanna, I have the same question for you.
Yeah, so in my BAs, I studied in Berlin, which is kind of a city where the schools are trying to have a more sustainable approach in general, how they teach their students. So that was kind of the starting point. And when it was time to kind of start thinking about my master thesis here, the topic was like kind of how someone takes their own life into a new country. So it kind of was more something abstract that I wanted to show by using old garments and transforming them into something that has a new life. And at that time I was also still working, and I would like take all the scraps with me and just try to make new textiles out of it. And that was how it worked for this collection that I'm working on right now. But I do have to say that like the drawback is probably that I would not know how to scale that on right, like up. Well, I would probably need to do it like Jussara and like only have very few limited pieces. Although I think there are designers that do that, they scale it up. Just for me, I would not yet know how I would do that. And but I do agree, like to have kind of this limitation that the old garment gives you, opens up new ways, right? It's like to think outside of the box. You need a box, so, and that kind of provides it. It's makes it very creative. Yeah.
That's really interesting, this idea of like creative design applied to problem solving in a much more kind of straightforward way than kind of just like the general problem of design. Delfina, can you talk about your upcycle designs and the drawbacks and the benefits to your process?
Yes, sure. Well, as a student, the budget I handle to work and create is very limited. So it's always either taking up donations or going to hunt as many resources as I can to fab scrap, and just try to get as much material I can that it's basically upcycling. And it's it's great in terms of creativity. It just allows me to work in different ways. For knitting, I last semester I was able to create my different like a different color palette using white yarn and then embedding the threads from discarded heathers into it to create a color textile, for instance. And it has those happy moments, and then it's a little bit more of extra work in terms of being just more responsible in how you categorize the different ways it can be post or pre-consumer, and has it been touched or worn or not necessarily, and if it's not upcycling a garment and it's just getting it directly from a factory that just is throwing a specific material, then it it's sometimes hard to track down what type of fiber it is. So it's harder to make a single fiber type garment. So you have to do a little bit more of homework when it comes to separating those materials and being able to responsibly work with them, but at the same time the creative output is just far more interesting, in my opinion. I really like it. Is that all the questions? Did I answer?
I think you hit them all.
Uh,
I do want to follow up this question because Jussara
mhm.
touched on it a little bit, and so did Johanna. Is there a way to kind of upscale, not necessarily what you do in terms of what each of you do in terms of upcycling garments, but is there a way to scale this type of kind of recycling goods for a mass market? Or maybe that's not the point. Maybe that's just not compatible. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think they actually are not compatible, and I think that instead of looking at it as a drawback, we can just look at it from just a different perspective than what we were doctrinated. Scale has been embedded on our concept of a business, of a successful business, and that is actually not true. It's just basically not true at all. In fact, I think it brings a lot more trouble then it brings you pleasure and a return, a positive return. I can only speak for myself, because even though I was never really mass marketing my clothes, we were producing in a scale. And if I compare my revenue from when we were doing, millions of dollars in terms of financial value in production, and my hundreds, on the lower hundreds of what I do now, I would say that I actually make more, I bring more money home, and the process of my profession has gotten enhanced. And I'm not just saying that to promote zero waste, or that kind of category, or which actually should be, at some point it will revamp into something of its own. But for now we call it zero waste. But I think there's a lot of concepts that we need to sort of reevaluate in our own terms, but there are a huge opportunity there, and it doesn't have to be big, because once it gets big, and the reason I say it's incompatible is because once it gets big, you can't give the same attention. It's just unhumanly impossible, and have machines do the job is never going to be the same with its imperfections, with what gives the work in small scale, hand embroidered, whatever those characteristics are, and sometimes it can be a little misplaced stitch. All of that a computer couldn't do, and there is beauty on it in the little imperfections. So I'd say that there's a big movement going on right now where very smart people are reevaluating all these concepts that we were fed with, and our parents were fed with, and it was different times, but they don't apply anymore. And part of it is even like our economic system. Capitalism is good in a lot of ways because it doesn't have a centralized power, which is definitely not what we want. But there are things that needs to be adjusted. Scale is one of them, and the environmental impact of creating wealth is a huge problem that we have to tackle. We can't keep ignoring, because we took so much and we threw away so much that now we can't sort of figuratively speaking, we can't sweep under the rug anymore. So, Johanna, to your concern, just keep it open-minded, because first of all, scale and mass production is for something that is needed, and clothing is not needed. No matter how beautiful my clothes are, your clothes are, it's just not needed. In that kind of scale, people do not need so much clothes. So if we as designers, which we are a little bit ahead of the curve, we realize that we change the way we produce and transform things and use our imagination to make clothes. Because clothes, until the culture really changes, we still need to wear clothes. We still need to cover our bodies. So our jobs are still relevant for the time being, and we just have to keep it very open-minded, and listen to some people that are really out there. These are very, very intelligent people, professors, and in different areas. They are all pushing the change of the little recalibration of the system, and everything around it that is happening right now.
Johanna, do you want to add anything to that? This idea of scale?
Yes, I want to say this is not a concern of mine. I'm not really concerned about. I'm sorry, there's just now someone is doing some renovations. I'm sorry if that's
Oh, I can't hear
disturbing.
it, so I think you're okay.
Okay, good. Just started. I'm not at all worried about that. I think I agree that we have to take a step back from this mass production that we don't need. And I think there is a kind of re-education necessary towards the consumer, obviously, and also how government regulations have to happen, I think. But I just think that those pieces that I make, and unfortunately I did not research yet what the other panelists are doing, but I just see that are not items for every person, right? It's just like very specific and takes long hours, and I'm sure there are people that love it and would be willing to buy one of those items, but it's also a one-of-a-kind item, right? And that is what I'm trying to say. So each item is going to be different, and so yeah, that is kind of more what I meant with saying it's not scalable. You cannot put out a collection with the approach that I took, where there's going to be however many items looking the same. Yeah.
Delfina, I'd be so interested to hear, because you're such a young designer, the next generation, like, how do you feel about this idea of scale? Do you want to produce to scale or no? Or, how do you feel about this?
Well, well, it's definitely it's a fact. I mean, the resources are limited, and that we are in this huge problem environmentally. I do think that there's design systems that we can um ups what is it ups just upscale, sorry, that we can upscale modular design, which is what I'm working with. It's not necessarily that you need the exact same material to work with that design system, but it's the same concept. So it's not necessarily I can apply modular design to different cities that have different resources available and use those. Are of course dealing with waste, and if it's not dealing with waste, just honoring the material in a very strategic way. Well, but it's definitely never gonna be at the pace of fast fashion, and especially if you're working with waste, it's not compatible, as Jussara says. Just you cannot just expect just zero waste collection be produced at the same scale as a fast fashion company. But it's definitely, you can definitely upcycle the upscale the way in which you design, which is more focused and more strategic. Exactly. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the resources, but the way you design that I think can be
That's so interesting. So I'm going to remind all of our listeners that if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat. But I have individual questions for each of our panelists, and I'm going to reverse the order, and Delfina, and go back to you, because I'd love for you to explain your modular design kind of concept and system, and how it works and how it contributes to sustainability.
Yes.
I want to add also something
please.
about the scale. I think that the question was directed to scaling production, but which I said no, I don't think that is compatible to slow fashion. But there is a way of scaling the practice of recycling, where smaller designers, smaller companies can just do the same thing and replicate and mimic that sort of process of taking things that already exist, that are already polluted and was extracted, and take them out of the route to the landfills, and do something to it, whether it's shredding the materials to become something else, another textile, if possibly I hear that, or what we are doing, which is transforming them through different kinds of interventions into something that feels new. And that idea, I think it has to be scaled, actually, because we need a lot of cleaning. We need like a whole army of designers doing what I'm doing and some other people are doing, in order for it to actually become a solution, a solution that is it's takes its importance and has a presence that it actually makes a difference. So scale is not all that bad. It just depends on how and what you scale.
And this idea, if you scale the idea, then like you certainly, all the designers out there, you certainly can produce enough clothes for everyone. But it's just coming from not one company, but maybe like 100,000 designers.
Exactly.
Delfina, tell us a little bit more about this modular design.
So how I started it was during the waste management design challenge. The idea of modular design is, I usually give the example of creating Legos, and modular design being just one Lego that you design, but that translates into clothes. So the way I design is I create this textile modules basically that have different attachment features that allow that one module to be replicated and then assembled either by the user or by the company. I created an online guide if someone is interested in knowing more about the specific terminology and different categories of modular design that I can drop in the chat later. But it's basically I'm trying to reclaim the users and the wearer's creative expression by creating modules that they can attach themselves and adapt their garments to their own needs, and not the garments. The garment has to adapt to the user instead of the user to the garment, which I think is the main concept of modular design. And specifically for working with waste, it's important because it just allows for you to categorize the different types of fibers or different types of material in such way that it's easier than to be discarded at the end of life or just be recycled. It's easier to make maybe a garment that is a single type of fiber when it's all made of cotton and you can control it, just and then throwing away that specific module to or recycling that fiber and then being able to separate the other modules that are not necessarily made out of all entirely cotton. So that's basically modular design.
So interesting that you're already thinking about the end life at the beginning, but also this idea comes across. What all three of you have been saying is that, sustainable design isn't just good for the environment. It seems like we're making clothes that we like better, that fit our lives and our kind of uses better. So Jussara, I want to go back to you and ask if you can talk just a little bit about the challenges of moving towards sustainable production, because you started in a more traditional model. And is this something that do you think every brand can do, either fully or partially?
Well, I would say yes, if they have the willingness to let go of all that centralized power. I would say for companies that are bigger than mine, it will definitely be harder, but definitely not impossible. You just have to perhaps use the way that I did, which was from going to a mid-sized company, or you can also say a small company, into a very small company. But they could, divide within their big conglomerate and let more designers come in to do that, which would also be so much better for the new generation, because I think the new generation of fashion designers, they're coming out of the schools really troubled. Before, like you said, it was only the problem of coming up with a great design. That was our biggest problem. Now, like something that people would like, and now it's that didn't go away, but you had to add a whole element of how to do that and how to achieve that without harming the environment. So that's quite daunting. But the one little lifesaver I will throw out there is that once you commit yourself to do it in a way that is not going to harm the environment, because to be honest with you, if you can figure that out, I would say, like I put it to myself, just change careers, just change it, because I don't know, or I mean, it's hard for me, because I'm so involved with what I do, to fathom the idea that I would be spending so much energy and my time, which is precious, is our lives, doing something that I know is not good for the environment, and at the end is not good for us humans, because we depend on the environment. So I would say, if you can't crack that, forget about it, do something else. But the one thing that I must say to give you, and it's a very true and proven experience, is that once you commit yourself to it, the universe, and it sounds sort of new agey, but the universe conspires in your favor. And that creativity that you were like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to make the next beautiful dress, it has that sort of intervention that because you're so committed to doing something beautiful that's not going to harm, it helps the creative process. It really does. It is not easy, of course not, but it's just a little more, it's a little bit more there's better chance of you coming up with something beautiful. That's basically what I say, because I mean, also experience does help, but the what I've been producing, and when I say producing is one-offs, really it's not that much clothes. They have been so much more beautiful than my first part of my career, where I didn't know about the impact on the environment, and all I needed to do was to come up with something that was beautiful, because there are so many other people doing things that are even more beautiful or have more resources than you. So it's a hard place to compete, whereas these little niche that you create for yourself, you have less competition to begin with, and there's a bit different kind of inspiration. You know, the inspiration comes from a different place, and I think designers are problem solvers. I think designers that's sort of what we were gifted with, this creativity, to use it as a tool to decipher problems and come up. So I think it's already innate on all designers to feel that way, and so it just kind of opens up that sort of flow of energy, and then things do become more inspirational.
It's just like what Johanna was saying about, like, there has to be a box for you to think outside of it. But Johanna, I'm going to give you the last word. We have a few more minutes. So I want you to discuss the role of sustainability before you began the MA program, and how is the sustainability kind of incorporated into your education? It sounds like you were already well acquainted with it, but how is it being taught kind of to you and your peers and other people at other programs?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question that I thought about before I came here. But I don't know. I think as in many other fields, you obviously need to be curious about it, right? I think I did have, like, there were starting points in my BA where it's brought up as a topic, and that is kind of what awakes the curiosity. But if you're not curious, and there are people that are not curious about it, unfortunately, then obviously it's not going to lead anywhere. And if you, like me, have to decide later on in your career to go back to school and to study, you kind of buy yourself time to, like, be curious about things. And I think that is more how it was for me. So it was not actually taught. I think it was just kind of the curiosity was awakened. Yeah. And I think I do have to say, it is in Berlin, I was, like, very much confronted with the topic every day, and I had, like, many of my friends in school were always doing sustainable collections, and it kind of made me also work with sustainable materials, not reclaimed clothing, but like fabrics that were made of, like, recycled polyesters or things like that. But just coming to New York, I realized not enough people are actually curious about it. And that made me even more curious. So, and I'm not an expert yet, but I'm learning more and more. And hopefully one day I will be an expert, and we will get to a point in society where knowledge is being, like, kind of available to everyone, and we are willing to share our learnings, and because we need to. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences on this panel. For everyone listening, please, you can go back to the conference page. All of their names are there. Please check them out, find them on social media, and do your research on them. And also, if you check back in a week or so, the recording of this talk will be here. So thank you so much to all three of you for joining me.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Girls, Delfina.
Nice to meet you, Jussara.
Bye.
I'll email you to keep in contact. All right, bye.